Hi, everybody. Welcome in. Happy Wednesday, I think. Welcome to creating shorts and cinematics as a solo creator. If there's any small teams here, that'll probably also help you. Big teams, you'll get nothing from this. Just kidding. Yeah, woo. My name is Sir. That's my first name. You might know my YouTube channel, Sir Wade. That's my first and my middle name, just in case anyone's curious. Everyone seems to think it's a YouTube bit, but that's my actual name. So I go by Sir. Sir Wade online. And I'm an animator. I'm a full-time content creator. I left the studio world a couple years back to just try a year of freelance and YouTube and just building community resources. And that year of risk, I called it, never ended. That was like 8 years ago. So I've just been doing this, and it's been great. The other thing I've been doing is a lot of training. And so between my YouTube channel, where I do a lot of educational content, I have some stuff on the EDC and more coming soon, which is very exciting. And I also have my own independent courses where I teach Unreal Engine. I've taught Maya and Blender, but lately it's been all Unreal because that's all I've been using, which is kind of by accident, but we're going to talk about that. Before I go any further, I'll show you some cool stuff that I've made for some of these different things. Enjoy.
Be silent. Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth.
Woo. Thank you. There's a variety of levels of polish in there because everything I do is sort of in the service of learning more things. And so that's what today's going to be about. I'm going to start off with when I knew nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean really nothing. It's a long story that we won't get into today, but we'll just kind of touch it. And then we'll jump through a bunch of other helpful things that hopefully will meet you wherever you're at. We're going to start off with some kind of basic, get everyone up to speed in case you're newer to doing stuff in Unreal. And then we'll get to some more advanced workflows a little bit later on. So without any further ado, the first thing I ever made in Unreal was a music video. And it was a miserable experience. Not because of Unreal, but because I had no idea what I was doing. And this motion capture-based music video. If you read the description to this talk and it said like, a misguided freelance project that went wrong, that's this. The idea was to do a live action and animation kind of blended medium thing and eventually like visual effects integration. Stuff that I would normally be pretty good at. I like that kind of thing. But I was like, you know, we should do it in Unreal. I want to learn Unreal. I really believe in project-based learning. And I thought, what better way to learn than just jumping in on a professional project that's supposed to have a whole team in place. How hard could it be? Considering that it ended up just being me for a solid year with no team, it was not easy. It turned out it was actually really, really hard. And so I have a video about the failed animation studio, because that's kind of what it ended up being. But I got a lot out of the experience. I learned a lot of things. Some of the things that I knew worked well from the start that was just kind of, I wasn't expecting. Jumping into Marketplace at the time, being able to just download a bunch of stuff as an animator, that's not a thing we usually are doing, you're just kind of animating. So being able to just grab all this stuff that had, you know, the grass moves and obviously the lighting, like we all kind of know now, like, yeah, it's gonna look nice. That was all brand new because Maya's not really, it's not a pretty piece of software. And that's where most animators come from. It's not, it's functional. But my big problems, these are kind of the three things I identified as my biggest weaknesses at the very beginning, which were I had no idea how the actual like files worked. So it was a mess in this project. I also didn't realize you could like edit in Unreal and you could put together the whole cinematic and then just hit export. So I was making individual shots and then exporting them. Like it was really, really weird. And I also thought, oh, there's gonna be lots of tutorials. Yeah, but a lot of them were really game dev focused and I really struggled to find what I needed for these workflows. So that's what we're gonna talk about a little bit today. The project, in general, we did a lot of importing of some really cool stuff, hired people for character design, for modeling, and we ended up making a bunch of shots. I ended up making a bunch of shots. And these might lure you into a false sense of security of like, wow, this actually doesn't look too bad for a first time. But if I hit play on all these, you're gonna see that every single shot has no animation, and is just a slow camera pan, because that's all I could figure out how to do. It was pretty. It was based on Genshin Impact stuff, which is a lot of these assets are kind of from that game. The only animation that I did do, and I was really planning on doing a bunch of cool animation stuff, but unfortunately, this is all just raw mocap, because I didn't really know how to use mocap at the time either, and this hurts my soul. But there was a really important lesson in all of this that I jumped into Unreal being like, yeah, I don't know anything about Unreal, but it's gonna be good. And then as I kept hitting these walls, I didn't know like what was wrong, what I was doing wrong. And so ultimately through this process, I learned the most important thing. I learned how to name the things that I didn't know. I figured out what problems I actually had, and I could kind of describe around them enough that I could begin to work my way through learning. So I'm gonna start off with a checklist. Everyone loves a checklist. And I'm not gonna read these to you because they're long. These are all the plugins that I use. Not every single project requires these, and a lot of these they're there by default. There are some of these that, like if you download something from Fab and you jump into a project, it might not have some of these enabled, or depending on your template, so I just like to put them all in there, even though some of them I think are probably never unclicked. And then there's a few at the end with asterisks. Those are the like non-normal ones. That's like if you're using extra tools or certain hardware, things like that. But I do, and I like them, and so I thought I'd include them so you can research them on your own. And I'll have some examples of what these do later on. More checklists, or more things. My go-to settings, every time I start a project, these are the things I make sure on the left. And then some hotkeys. Those aren't like the total list of hotkeys, but those are the ones that I use a lot, and I don't see them like written super often in other places. Some of them are kind of more common, but they're just helpful, so. One more thing. One of the things that I mentioned in the settings a second ago on the left side was a manipulator thing. So just to point out like what that does, anybody who's done any 3D animation in any other tool, the manipulator on the right is the one that we're enabling. The one on the left is the default. They have different behaviors, but I typically work on the right one. And so if you're doing cinematics and you're doing like animation related things, very, very helpful. One more slide of these things, CVARs. In the bottom left corner of Unreal Engine, there's a little text field, and you can drop these in. You don't need to put all of them. That's a big important thing. The top two, yes, you want those. The top one you actually don't need to do in 5.6 because there's a setting called focus mode that was on the last slide, and that's what that does. Focus mode turns that CVAR on, which is really nice. It means you can move your mouse over a window and use a hotkey instead of having to click in it to then be able to do hotkeys. Super helpful. And then constraints, that activates all the good new speed stuff, which is really, really nice for a lot of reasons. We'll talk a little bit about these other ones later. These ones at the bottom are really conditional. If you're like, oh, I don't want motion blur, that's a way to turn it off. If you aren't using the new Keynote foliage voxel stuff, then these ones at the bottom are a good way to sort of force the LOD of all the objects like foliage in your scene so that if you have weird stuff in the distance, I've had that a couple of times, thought I'd mention it. But this one about streaming pool size, that's the answer to if you've ever had this happen, where your textures just get really gross looking, and you just change, and you see in the top left corner, you can barely see it, texture streaming pool over the limit. You just increase the number, just try a different number, and it'll make it a lot nicer. So if you ever run into that, that's what that is. And then this. These are great. William Fauché has a great YouTube channel. A lot of great cinematography stuff, color grading, highly recommend. And he has some amazing plugins that you can grab on Fab. And then Anthony Coitra, right over here, has built for us the Locodrome Mat, the MetaHuman animation tool. It's a picker. I do not animate metahumans without that. It is so much nicer with that. So highly recommend, thanks to this guy. And then one more tool, and then we get into the other stuff. I'm only recently converted into this. There's another thing Anthony put me onto, but Diversion is a revision control system. Bottom right corner of Unreal Engine, there's a little menu, revision control. And you can connect it to various options, per force and a bunch of different things. It pops up with some options. I use Diversion, and I've used it for a couple of weeks, and I'm obsessed with it. I'm gonna use it for everything. Basically what it lets you do, if you've never worked in a studio environment where this is normal, it allows you to basically say, hey, I want my entire project to be synced with sort of their cloud service. It's all secure and encrypted, or however you describe that. They're probably here somewhere, I don't know. And it allows you to basically sync your project so that if something goes wrong, You can roll back to old versions. Every time you hit commit, you can leave yourself a comment, so you can keep track of what those old versions were. Because the way to iterate in Unreal is a little bit weird. You have to be like duplicating files, naming the new things. If you forget to do that, this is your lifesaver. And then in the desktop app, that's like the menu of like, there's all my versions with all my comments, and your dates and your timestamps and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, moving forwards, let's all get on the same page really quick. I don't know how, actually I want to ask, who in here is like animation is your main thing? Good group. Shout out whatever else if it's not animation. I heard probably like 10% of what you yelled, but there was a big variety there. Thank you. So some of you might need this. Characters in Unreal, as we might know, are very different than other tools. And then that throws a lot of people off, especially animators. It's not just like a model that gets a rig, and then that is your asset, and you bring in your character with your modeled, or your rigged model, and then you go. There's like a whole ecosystem of how these things work together. At the core level, the skeleton is the thing that determines whether what you're trying to do is going to work with the other thing you're trying to do it with. So if you've got a character and you've got motion capture or a rig somewhere that you're like, can I connect these things? The skeleton's what determines whether those things are compatible with one another at a super, super high level. And then the skeletal mesh or the blueprint, depending on how complex your character is probably the thing you're going to drag and drop to like use that character. The skeletal mesh is basically just the character with the bones inside. It's all skinned. It works. There may not be a rig attached to it, but that's the thing you need to move forward. Metahumans or blueprints, as an example, there are a lot more pieces to them, and so they're constructed. They're like it's like in After Effects, if you know that one. It's like a pre-composition of other things. I don't know. One more thing on this is sort of the project file type of assets that we have to work with. Levels and maps. Super high level, super quick. Your levels, if you download a fab or a marketplace asset, you'll often find a folder called maps, and that's where you'll find levels a lot of the time. But that is like the world, and the world is separate from whatever you choose to do in it or whatever other things you want to add to your shot or your sequence, which all of that stuff happens in level sequences. It's a different type of asset, and it's just a blank container. You can nest them within each other to create subsequences, but each one is just a level sequence. That's sort of the core of what every animator is always looking for. Like, how do I like work in Unreal? You want a level sequence. That's like your animation file. And that's also your shot file for everything else. I think here, yes. Here, I'm going to jump into Unreal super quick, and we're going to try a thing. As long as this is going to work. Hey, cool. So here's an Unreal project, and this is, yep, that slide was out of order, but that's okay. So at a super base level, here I am in a level, in a world, right? This is downloadable on Fab. It's a stylized Tokyo environment. And you can have inside, let me actually close this little menu here. The level itself is just the level. Anything can be in there, and that's great. We're running off my laptop, which is why it's a little bit slower than it should be. That's on me. But if you open a level sequence, then you'll get to see your timeline, and that's where you get to see whatever other shots you have. Now, I've left a few things kind of broken in the level sequence here, so you can see. If I hit play, you're going to see a couple things happen. This little cone does its thing. Suddenly, a character pops in, and then they're animated. Then the character is going to disappear, and then we're back to this character walking away. Each of these shots is completely independent of one another. They don't talk to each other, but this level sequence that we're in now that contains each of them just lets us play through them. The thing that I want to mention, the things that can be helpful, are if you're getting started with level sequences and you're trying to nest them, just a helpful tip is every single level sequence that's like nested within, I would recommend just throwing in the left area here, you can add stuff. I'd recommend in pretty much every level sequence, you want to add a camera cuts track. That is what's going to allow you, by clicking the little button here, to pop into any camera that you may have had like up above. So let me go ahead and go back to show you that if I have here, this camera, oh, actually, probably would help if I had had a camera cut track in this one. So let me go ahead and add that. That's what I was supposed to show you. So if you add a camera cut track, there's different ways you can do this. There's all kinds of different configurations. A camera cuts track is sort of your editing window as well. So you can see here I have like a shots track. You can also go to camera cuts and you can add shots here as well. And I actually don't want to spend too long on this because we got other things to show that are much cooler than this. But just to show you that in this first track, if I double click in, this one's set up in a way where you have, I don't know if you can read that, but it's like lighting, effects, animation, environment. You can have different types of things. And this is really when you have teams of people, how it's supposed to be. Each artist can grab one of those and they're not stepping on each other's work. As an individual, do you need to do this? That's really up to you. If it helps you to sort of separate stuff, cool. I typically don't go super granular with this process. I will do it, however, if I need, go back up here. If I need, for example, a whole bunch of shots to happen and I need something happening across all those shots, I'll have one subsequence that does that thing as like a base layer across this entire timeline. And then my other more independent stuff are shots that layer on top of that. You'll see a little bit of those examples later. In this second shot, super quickly, you can see this one had a second character all of a sudden. And that's just as a reminder that some assets, you basically just drag and drop them from your level and then you can access them. But if you drag and drop something specifically into this window that doesn't go into your level, you can also convert it in other ways. It gets this little icon here, this little lightning bolt. That means it's instant. That means it only lives inside this level sequence. That's why the character, Quinn up here, she disappears when we're not looking at this shot. So when I scrub out of that shot, she doesn't exist. She's only spawned in when we're in that zone. So that can be really helpful to know as well. And you can also edit these. You can see how this has like a little gap in here. That's because the out point is set earlier. And so you do need to kind of pay attention when you're linking them together. It's powerful. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's just good to know some of those things. Okay. One last little setup-y thing is your favorites and your collections. In this kind of bottom left area here, you can see that the content browser has a little favorites menu that a lot of people don't realize is there when you're starting out. You can add folders into that menu just to get to them really easily, especially when you start to have a lot of stuff. And you can also have collections down at the very bottom where you can basically create, that doesn't go into revision control. These kinds of things are just personal to your file. So if you're just for your own organization, you want to put characters or certain assets that you want to get to really quickly, just a quick way to get to it. And then also, these are out of order, but that's okay. Filters. Your content browser has a little filter button, and you can just tag things that you want to find easily. And as soon as you turn that filter on, it just creates a little button inside of the content browser down here that you can hit that, and whatever folder you're looking at, it'll just look for that type of asset. So you can see you can just filter by level sequence or whatever else. So that text was optional, and the additional text was supposed to go there. Oops. Every time I start an actual project, getting into it now, I start with these same two questions. What am I inspired by, and what do I have to work with? It's all about figuring out sort of what direction to go, because in my case, I am not the kind of creative artist that just has lots of ideas and I've got stories to tell and I have a vision. I call myself technically creative. Like, I'm technically creative because my creativity comes from tools and features and sort of reverse engineering creativity from whatever thing I'm like looking at that goes, oh, that's really cool. I wonder if you could do this and this and this. And I end up doing something that's like, wow, what a creative idea. It's like, no, I just know the tool really well. And so for me, it's about goals and tools. To learn something new is always my goal, but trying to figure out what direction to point that in is often dictated by tools or limitations or features or something. That's how I choose to do it. You do your thing. But it always kind of ends up in this section where it's like, all right, how do I begin? What do I have to work with? And this is kind of my 4 boxes of just what I'm evaluating. I'm not going to read all this to you. You can read. But I will point out 2 things. For animation, in Unreal, most things I think we're used to seeing realistic. There's obviously amazing stylization happening by tons of great teams. But as individuals, the tool set is more geared towards realism, usually, I feel like. And so I'm going to show you a few things a little bit later to kind of push that a bit more. And then as far as all the other stuff, there's just so many different options and so many different ways to do things. For cameras, you can manually animate them, or you can connect your phone or your iPad and do live link and just pile it around and you see into the 3D scene. I thought about doing it live, but I don't think with the convention Wi-Fi, I wasn't willing to take that risk. So you can Google that one. But with characters specifically, These are three of the most kind of well-known ways to do it. You can actually just animate the characters, which, right? Some of us are going to be willing to do. Others in this room don't want to touch that. That's fine. Motion capture is the most sort of established workflow inside of Unreal. And there's also MetaHuman Animator, which we saw in the keynote yesterday. Now works live, which is crazy. It's very cool. And then one that I don't think as many people realize is here is the gameplay logic. You can actually sort of record stuff that's happening in the engine in Take Recorder, whether it's using blueprints or whatever. Like, you don't have to necessarily know how to use blueprints, but you know how when you open the third-person template file and you hit play and you're controlling the character, you can just record everything that happens in the scene, and that becomes an animation file that you can then edit and do cool stuff with. I think there's literally a talk happening right now about that topic. And so if we have some time, I'll show a couple of things. But I have a lot of examples, so I don't know how much we'll get through. This was my first sort of animatic that I made in Unreal as I started to learn stuff. Every piece of animation is actually I'm not using any of those three options. I'm not using specific motion capture. I'm not using gameplay, anything, and I didn't hand animate a single thing. This, with this very slow-paced thing that I watched this and I was like, wow, this is really boring. I got to redo the whole idea. This was version 1 of that like robot lightsaber fight, which thank goodness I changed it because this is so slow. But this is actually the example I was talking about where there's all these characters just like sprawled around, which was a little bit morbid, and I changed that. That's just a subsequence of like all those characters being affected by a pose across the entire sequence, where this character has their own shots. But every bit of animation is just from what was the marketplace at the time. It'd be Fab now, right? It's just technically motion capture, but it's just motion capture clips, animation sequences that I just dropped in, and you just line them up and you blend them together. And I tried to aim for making sure like the feet were not super far away or anything, but everything in here is just blended animation clips. Took very little work, and it was a nice way to sort of figure out, is this the direction I want to go? No, it's not. I did a similar thing with this. This was an exercise for me just to figure out how to make an environment. So I'm not going to talk too much about that right now. But you can see that the character is walking a little bit slower. If you go to, actually, let me go ahead and show you the thing. If you have animation data, which we do here, in this particular shot, these are the clips I'm talking about. With your character down here in the sequencer, you can add animation. If you don't already have an animation track, you can go and you can find any compatible animation with your character. And so if I went and did that, which I already did, I have an idle and a walk, and they're just close together and they blend. So if I blend them super aggressively, the feet are going to slide a lot more, right? And then I just keyframe the character starting to move forward. But what you can do with these too is you can right-click on them, go to Properties, and just in case you've never looked in here, you can change things like the play rate. You can reverse it. You can adjust things about how this data is run through the engine. So it's just a really quick way that if you are using these kinds of these workflow tricks, this gives you a little bit more flexibility without having to actually go down and bake the stuff to control rigs or do layered control rigs, things like that, which I will show. So back to the larger projects. Actually planning the cinematics itself. This is sort of my list. I kind of go through this every time. My first whole, what do I want to make, is really about tone and learning. Planning for me is the biggest part, and you've seen now the 3D animatic. That's what we just saw, where I just kind of use stuff that's available and I throw it in there. I'll sometimes draw stuff, but I'm not that great of an artist, but that is pretty quick. For me, reference, I'll show you an example. I basically will film everything to practice what it is I want to make in 3D, because I can do video editing way faster than I can do any of these other things. Doing YouTube for this long, that's kind of become one of my like fastest skills. And so I'll film stuff and I've always liked reference. So that to me is super helpful. From there, I call it creative phase 1 because that's like the block out. Just I do everything at a really high level just to get it kind of working. Because one of the big things about Unreal that everyone will talk about, right, is with a big team, you have simultaneous workflows and everybody can jump in at the same time and you can have the pipeline be different, this waterfall pipeline. It doesn't have to go conveyor belt style. Everyone can kind of share. As one person, this is my version of that, where I'll kind of just touch everything and kind of just get everything kind of working. Because what's nice is you never have to like redo work. You can just continue to iterate on stuff from the beginning when you're all the way over here in lighting, because it all still works. To me, that's how that benefit comes to small teams and individuals. And then eventually you get to actually doing the tie down stuff. You actually do the work. This is just an example. This is not for this talk. This was an example of like, I'm gonna film this thing because I might animate a person getting out of a drop ship.
Thing called handles.
So this is just what I do in my office. And I play with ideas like, oh, maybe the helmet like Avengers its way out of here. Or like, how would I grab the handle? And it's all sound effects. Now this is a little bit more fun. Anybody recognize that? Thank you. Does anybody know what that's from? John Wick, yeah. The little thing gets you at the end. I thought it'd be fun to redo a John Wick scene. And that is about a crash mat for that, to help my downstairs neighbors. This is what I end up capturing every time I do something like this. This was motion captured. I want to thank Xsens if they're here. Movella Xsens has loaned me a suit to use for videos. And this is what I'm doing with it. So I'm putting it to good use. But top right corner is what you just watched. It's my version to be like, ooh, I can see it. Do I like it? Is it working? And I'll basically, there's so many different takes that I went through that I cut and I found the best ones. And so I edit a video of it so that I know what it's going to look like eventually. Top left corner is my way to just kind of see the whole thing, just separate, without it being cropped. Bottom left is really helpful for timing. I try really, really hard to keep a count in my head when I do these kinds of things so that I can kind of line up the actions without having to do a lot of speed ramping or motion adjusting, because I can do it with animation tools, but if I can just get it in capture, that's always best, and it's a fun challenge. So this is my way to kind of see, is it lining up? And then the one on the bottom right is probably the most important, which is I screen record while I do my motion capture so that later on when I'm doing all this work and I've edited all the stuff, I don't have to go searching for frame numbers. I just watch that, and then I mute that track, and underneath it is those. And I can see the frame numbers. Or you can just burn it in on the frames, metadata, that kind of thing. But that's my like capture process. That's my like, try to not cry later. Now, this John Wick animation is not done yet. I'm gonna work on it later today at the Puget Systems booth at 1:30. So if you want to come and hang out, see some demos, and watch me take this a little bit further, this is the current state of that data. You bring it all in. Please ignore when they're T-posing, because it kind of snaps them in position once we hit those animation tracks. But obviously, there's no animation done whatsoever so far. It's just the raw capture data. This isn't even retargeted. And it works pretty well. I didn't jump quite that far. That would hurt. But there's that. Now, there is one kind of tangent I want to make here. So there's me. If you look really closely, you see when they kind of switch motion clips and they kind of buzz, they kind of will fizzle right around there. See that? That could easily have been adjusted with a bunch of different things. There's a lot of different ways that you can do the capture. There's a lot of different ways you could mess with an engine. I left that there and then realized like, I should have done it differently. But I left that there so I could tell you one specific thing. Earlier in the presentation, I had a CVAR called t.max frame rate. One of the things that happens in Unreal is the engine will go as fast as it can to evaluate the frames. But when you're watching it back, sometimes, even if you're set to 24 FPS or something, your viewport will give you more frames than that actual number. And if you get weird artifacts, you can lock the viewport with that CVAR to only give you 24 FPS on your screen. So you get a better representation of what the actual render is going to look like. Doesn't really account for motion blur, but that sometimes happens in other examples you'll see later. Mannequins specifically are the best thing to be working with, in my opinion. If you have a specific asset that you've built a custom character and that's what you're using, then obviously like go for it. But if you don't have like the rig all figured out and everything's like locked down, mannequins are a really good baseline because everything with them just works really well. Everything's designed around them. They've got control rigs. They've got sort of all the blueprint stuff set up. So anything you're trying to do across the engine, you can pretty much use the mannequin for some part of the workflow and then eventually bring your character into the mix. So maybe you grab something from Fab and it doesn't have a control rig, or it doesn't have, I don't know, blueprint stuff set up and you don't know how to do that. You don't need to, because you can just do, like I said, you could record the gameplay stuff here with Take Recorder, get the animation data, retarget it onto your character later, or whatever. These are the baseline for everything I do, including motion capture, especially because the IK/FK switches are built into the whole rig. One thing I want to show you really quick here is if I come back to this, there's a feature that you should know about. Well, actually, there's two things you should know about. If I just jump back to, I'm just going to keep using this example here. In here with these characters, if I delete the custom animation on Manny, bye-bye, and I just add something with mocap, just something with, we'll just do his run. Keep it really simple. There's his run. And if you have ever had to deal with, for example, feet sliding in mocap, there is a bunch of really specific workflows we could get into, but at a really, really base level. Motion capture is an FK system. Everything starts at the hips, it works down from there, and so if you need to like lock the feet down and you don't have an IK rig, you're not gonna have a good time. There's a lot of features in Unreal that we can get by with that, but one thing we can do here is you can actually just, well, first of all, you could just, first we need to lock this into, or bake this onto our control rig. And so what we can do is we can bake to control rig, and you can say bake to mannequin body. You get some options, let's just say go for it. What it'll do is it'll convert all that motion data into keyframes. Hopefully you've all seen this before, but this will bake it all down onto the rig. That's one way to do it. I'm gonna delete that. I'm going to right click this and I'm going to reactivate it because it defaults to going away once I replace it. And I'm gonna show you a different method. There's also layered control rigs where you could add a rig on top, which is also very handy. And so what I'm gonna do here is gonna say control rig, check the little layered box. This is a 5.4 feature, so this isn't super new, but everyone should know about it. So now I've got a rig on top of the mocap data, right? Still does its thing, still runs around, but instead of having keys baked on all the frames, I have clean curves. We could also do animation layers. Like there's so many different options. We could spend an hour and a half just talking about this, but we won't. What I want to point out is because this rig is, the thing about this rig, the reason I want to point it out is if you hit the global control at the bottom, you have your IK/FK switchers. So it defaults to IK feet, which means that we can easily move the feet around, and we don't have to worry about that whole FK mocap business. That's pretty straightforward, but a lot of people don't realize you can do this with the hands too. So maybe you have all this capture data, or stuff from Fab or stuff that you've made, and you want to change it later. Whoa. That's right, I'm working off a laptop. You can switch the hands into IK, and that solve went to both skeletons. So it's still doing its thing. I went beyond the scope here. It's still doing its thing, but now you have control over where the object is in an IK space, instead of, for those of you who aren't an animator and don't know what I'm talking about, if I switch the right arm back to FK, this one is more based around individual rotations of the upper, lower arm and the wrist, which is the default for this kind of thing. And there's one last thing here, which is if you have sort of preset these values, you put the control rig on, and you make all those decisions. I really like working with this setting tweak this way, FK, IK, all these things. If you right click on your character and you create an animation track and you right click down here, actually best way to do that, I will do this. Let me go ahead and delete all the animation on Quinn. That's the fastest way to do this. If I go to Quinn, and I go to her control rig, say go ahead and add control rig, turn off layered because we don't need it, not right now, mannequin. What I can do is I can right click in this area specifically, and there's a button called import anim sequence into this section. I can pick an animation clip to bring in, so if I go grab her run cycle, and what it'll do is it'll ask you a quick question, whoops, unless I get rid of the little button here. There's a thing here that says reset controls. That's the default. If you uncheck this, it won't reset the controls. It'll leave it with all your settings. So then when you bake it, it bakes into those preferred modes. That's like an animator thing. If you're not an animator, that's like cool. But that's like a really cool thing. Please be impressed. Thank you. What's more useful for everybody is the idea that because you maybe started with a mannequin, like I did here, you can swap the character later. It was going really fast. Also, shout out to Embergen. That was an Embergen simulation that I brought in as a VDB and dropped it in, and then used it in the scene, which is very cool. But that character, all the animation did, I just switched. I just switched the character and dropped it in. I just copy-pasted it. Because the skeletons are compatible. So it's exactly the same, and then I got to play with the face. And it feels just a little bit more violent now that he has a face, so I feel a little bad for him. Which takes us into the next section of when we're dealing with metahumans. Obviously, there's a lot to do. They're a lot more involved than mannequins and things like that. I just want to make a couple quick call-outs of things that I struggled with when I was working with them. Metahuman Animator specifically is that ability to record your face performance and then put that on a character. You can do it like you saw yesterday, 2 days ago. What day is it? Whatever the day the keynote was. You can do it live now. But you can also just take an audio file, drop it in, and it'll generate a lot of great facial animation, which you can use if that's all you need. In my case, I use it as a starting point. But the one thing I want to point out is the little purple thing, which is there's a little hidden checkbox. It's not hidden. It's just that when you open a new editor in Unreal, it's not maximized. And I was working on this. This was my first time using the tool. And I was looking at the left for the longest time, and I was like, it just looks off. I don't remember it feeling so like subdued when I was recording it. And eventually I figured out how to get it to look on the right. We're like, oh, the head's actually now turning and the eyes are doing something different. But I didn't catch this for an embarrassing amount of time because I was focused on all the other things. Because what I had done at the time, I was like, oh, blend mask or bone masks or whatever. And I went and I set all these different things to one, and I basically created this whole thing where like, oh, these joints are going to be allowed to do something and the other ones won't, and I'll set them all up and I'll make a blueprint, and I'll figure out that I spent so much time like figuring out, aha, the magic layered blend per bone, which is a great node, but it was completely unnecessary because for my workflow, this is the thing that you open up, it generates the face, and if you just look kind of in the right menu there's not a whole lot of options. If you maximize it, there's a little thing that says head motion. You just hit disabled, and then I don't have to do any of those things that I did, which was really nice to not have to do that anymore. Because in my case, I just wanted the facial data. But Metahuman Animator gives you sort of head motion, and that's what I was canceling out because the body had head motion and the Metahuman face had head motion, and those are the things that were blending over each other, and I didn't realize that they both had the head stuff, so I had to find a way to filter one or the other. Until now, you just hit the button. But for actual working with the face, so I'm gonna do this thing. This is my workflow for making metahumans feel a little bit more lively. I think we've all seen a metahuman that's just kind of like dead-eyed, staring into space, just feels really stiff and weird. They don't all, obviously, but like it's a process to learn this kind of thing. So I thought I'd give some of my tips. I'm doing a deeper YouTube video on this too, so if you're curious, I'm gonna go a lot more in depth on that. But for this particular example, I took the audio to face piece of Metahuman Animator, and I fed through a bunch of different options, tried lots of things. Eventually, not eventually, I made a character, plugged it all in. I was kind of doing my animation reference stuff of like, oh, let me look at the original source material, figure out what I want to do. And then I had come up with this whole workflow that is completely useless. Because again, this whole big box in the top left corner, the workflow overview, you don't do any of that. And it was when I was literally typing all this up. And I was like, oh yeah, this was genius. And I read it back and I'm like, yeah, that's right. And I sat there and I thought, I wonder if I could have just like copy pasted it on top of itself and if that would have worked. Because I tried some stuff, the copy paste worked. So that entire block of text is useless. And I'll show you what that is, because for everybody in here, even if you're not an animator, I think this will be actually really useful. What I'm going to do, I'm going to show you just really quickly. If I jump over to just a kind of blank scene, I'm going to load up the face animation stuff. And what I did specifically, whoops, here we go, is this one. Give it a second. When I did the Metahuman face project, I was saving as I went, and I was trying to keep track of each major change so I could really kind of look back and figure out what the best workflow should have been. Because I knew I was going to make mistakes along the way. And with this character, a tip for metahuman animation, you can just put the skeletal mesh of the head somewhere in your regular scene, in a blank level, and just animate that separately. I would recommend that because metahumans are so kind of involved. They can get kind of weird and you're like working on them and then the head detaches from the body and then you have to kind of go back and recompile and it can be kind of a pain. And I hope that's something that, I'm sure that's something that's being worked on, but for just easy like life, just put the head somewhere if you're gonna do the head. And then you can do the mannequin stuff for the body and you just combine them later. And what I did is I have here all of the iterations of the face. Whoa. Let me go ahead and come back over here. This is every version of the face. At the beginning, it was just about the raw data. And I did kind of one thing at a time, trying to make it better and better. And I named them so I wouldn't lose track of it. But the way I knew what to do, because animators are gonna have sort of the inherent, like you'll just, I'm gonna work on all these things and you kind of just work in chunks. But for everybody who's not an animator, dealing with facial animation can be kind of daunting. And I have a trick that I think works really well for this kind of thing. So I'm gonna show you how to do that. If I go back to the original one here, if I go to, actually, I already have it prepared, which is really helpful because we need that for time. Well, come back. So this one on the, get rid of all of them. This one on the left is the base animation that we got from Metahuman Animator. The one on the right, or sorry, flip it. The one on the left is normal, or the one on the right is normal. The one on the left is a little bit much. What I did to do this, it's very, very easy, is if you take the regular animation data, or the animation clip, or the sequence that you get, and you right-click on the character, and you bake it to the control rig, and you put it onto the face control board. It'll take that, and it'll create keyframe data, and it'll shove all that keyframe data onto your character. So if I delete these, you'll see that that character just has all the keyframe data. And what you can do is, this is a little bit of a hacky workflow. This is kind of doing animation layer stuff without doing animation layers. If you add a section, specifically, you have to click the plus button on the control board, not the other plus buttons, and you add an additive layer here. It creates another copy of the faceboard control stuff, and it's blank. And then what you can do, I always like to set a key on the first one, you just copy all this data and paste it onto the next layer, and what it'll do is it'll double. You're now adding the original animation data on top of itself. And you can continue to do this to keep upping it if you need to. You can get more control if you're using animation layers up here in the top left corner. That's how I was doing it for my actual workflow. But if you're not familiar with layers and you just want to try this, that's a quick way to just amp up the action. Why do you do this? Because if something's kind of not working and you're not like used to looking for it and your eye isn't trained as an animator to like identify, oh, the brows need to be smoothed out and whatever else. When things get a lot bigger and you see that the eyebrows are, for example, I think over here, if you watch the center of the two eyebrows, kind of that middle zone, and you'll see that they kind of vibrate up and down. That's one thing, is you might start to notice little motion patterns, like, oh, it's kind of bouncing around. I don't really like that. That's a little harder to notice when it's subtle, so you can sort of magnify and glass it up. But more importantly, it just increases the facial expression. And you can see that he looks more like sad and pouty. He's supposed to be angry. And so it takes any subtlety in the face and it just blows it up to be more of that emotion. So you can see, is that the emotion I want to use? Maybe I should use a pose library and I should try to change that up. And so eventually you can get to the final version, which is over here. And you can see that the final version I ended up with is a lot less pouty sad and a lot more just really pissed off. But that was kind of the trick that hopefully is useful for some of you in here. And then I got to blitz through because I am going slow. I'm talking too much. That's this. And then some of the other things I did. There is a custom control rig that was another thing from Anthony, quite over here from Locodrome. He built a custom control rig for me that basically gives me a control per bone inside the metahuman face. So there's a ton of controls, like so many. That's really for if you're not a fan of art and you're like, I want to animate everything, then you can. But that's not really supposed to be done. The thing that's really going to make the difference for everybody is the eyes. The eyes are usually locked to the head. And what you want to do is just change that. You can use constraints, you can use space switching, you can do all kinds of different things. Your goal is basically if the character's head moves away from a point, don't have the eyes follow with the head. Have the eyes lock on to whatever they're looking at, and if the head turns, they don't have to stay exactly on that spot. But you want to keep it in that general ballpark. Unless the character is darting their eyes to look at something else, you want an independence between the eyes and the head, and that's what's going to make a really big difference in making the character feel a lot more alive. Environment stuff, blah, 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 here's this. But that's what I meant by the custom face rig. Those are all the joints inside of a metahuman's face. The face board on the side keeps you from having to deal with that. I want that, I like that, and that's what I use to get like the really pushed expressions towards the end. And then one last little tidbit, this was really hard for me to find actually. If you ever want to render those little dots or the body controls or anything like that, if you want control rig stuff to show up in a render, it can be kind of helpful for things. There is an actor up in the top search bar of Unreal. You can just look for the control display actor, and then it allows you to just kind of drop it in your level. You can assign it to the character blueprint, and you just tell it what rig to look for. It's just kind of hidden, but it's in there. Kind of cool. Now, I got a rapid fire. I'm almost out of time. Some last things. These are recorded, luckily. The actor palette. This was a plugin. Most packs of things you'll grab come with a showcase level and a pack of like, here's all the things laid out next to each other. The actor palette is a window that you can pull up in the tools menu to be able to basically just say, hey, cool, like, yeah, there's that big fancy world, but let me see that overview with all the different pieces. And what you can do with this open is you can just drag and drop them into whatever scene you're actually working on. Right? That's so nice, and that's just there. You might have to turn it on, but that's super easy. The next thing, similar to it actually, is what's called level snapshot. This has been sitting up here and it's just a button I never clicked. That button up there, level snapshot, you can commit, say, hey, this is the original version. I like it this way. Sometimes you want to break stuff though, but you don't want to like really break it. But what you can do is you can save a level snapshot, then you can start to make changes to your level. Whatever you want to do, you can add stuff, you can move stuff, rescale, whatever. I didn't make that big of a change here. Let's just move the tree a little bit, rotate it, and then see if I can speed this up. Blah, blah, blah. And then what you do, I think I moved the bike, added an asset, let's go ahead. Here we go. Then you hit that level snapshot button again, and you just comment something else. Oh, I changed some stuff. You're saving states of this level, and you can even change the lighting and that kind of thing. And eventually, when you're ready, you just hit the little, let's see, that's a lighting commit, because lighting lives in the world. There we go. So then you open the editor, and you have all of your commits there on the side. And if you want, you can get specific pieces. You don't have to do all of it at once. But what you can do is you just select whatever the version is that you want to go back to, and you hit restore, and you can see there that you have that granularity should you want it. But when you hit the button, it just snaps it back. And you can easily just pop around to different versions of the level, which is really, really handy. Come on. Super fast here. One of the other plugins that I showed in the plugin area was the physics layout tool. This is one I got from William Fauche's YouTube channel. I learned about it through there. He has a great tutorial on it. I recommend watching it. But you can take any asset and just kind of spawn them in. And then you can save that as just stuff in your scene. So instead of having to place everything manually, if you just want some clutter, obviously we did rocks here, but you could take anything and any combination of different assets and just have them scatter. You don't need this plugin to do it. You can do it with Unreal's basic simulation tool. That was the K key earlier on. But anyway, one more thing. This is here's a trick to take, if you have environment assets and you have a skeleton in them. This is another one, shout out to Anthony. He's working on a short film with a small indie team, and they are doing this project. They had this, I had not seen this until they showed it to me. To take your environment assets, give it a skeleton, and then you can customize the environment to have different versions of it, and you create assets from the one. So one asset gives you an entire array of different things that you can use for your environment, which is very cool. There's that. And then here, I can see that I'm basically out of time, which is a bummer. I'm going to show you one more thing, and I think I have time for Q&A. All right, I can hang out after. for Q&A. The thing I wanted to show you here is what we affectionately call mouse mocap, which is how this was animated. If I jump back over here and I go back to this thing, it's actually the other project. Nope, not you. You. This animation, I did very little to actually animate the character. There's a great little trick, if I can just get this to not be frozen. There's a great trick where you can take any control rig asset. It needs to be a control rig specifically. You can't do it with like a cube or something. At least last I checked. Maybe that's changed in 5.6. But if it's a control rig asset, what you can do is if you hold onto a control, like left click and hold, on any control and hit spacebar, it'll start to play. And as long as you have auto key turned on, whatever you do gets captured as keyframe data. That's why we call it mouse mocap. And so this entire animation, I wanted wind resistance. I wanted him to feel like he has, air resistance being buffeted by the wind. And so what I did is inside of this little 2-shot sequence, I've got the 1 shot. You can see my camera cut track here. So that's how I'm accessing the camera from above. So if I click on this was the demo from earlier, I jump into the camera, even though the camera's at the bigger shot level. So it just lets me access it. And the character, if I go ahead and click on Manny here, hit his control rig, it'll jump into animation mode. And then if I take his arm, for example, you can see that he has a bunch of animation data. Now, I was doing layers to try some different things. I'm going to go ahead and just mute all of this. Boop, boop, boop. Nope, not that one. He needs that one. My bad. So I did just like a simple motion on his root. He's just an FK. He's just kind of falling forwards. The camera moves up towards him a little bit, and I've got these little Niagara speed lines, and that's what's making it seem like he's falling. But he's really just stuck here in space. But to get him to feel like the air resistance was happening, all I did is I took his arm controls, like that. I threw them in an animation layer. And in this particular case, I'm just going to use all 3 of these. We're going to see what happens. It's going to be a bigger motion than I want. But if I just go to the beginning, I'll go ahead and set a key. Oop, that was not quite what I want. Let me go ahead and undo that. Okay, well, that's fun. You know what? I'm gonna leave it. It's fine. Fix it later. I'm gonna hold in this. I'm holding down on the arc ball. I'm gonna hit spacebar, and I'm just gonna wiggle my mouse in a circle, and then I release. Obviously, I probably could have done this a little bit better. I could reset this really easily by just making a new layer, deleting this. So if I just mute this, it'll go away. And I can try this again without the scaling issue, whatever was happening there. So I'll just do that really fast, because it is really easy. Go like this. There we go. Animation layer 6, that's what I want. Go ahead and key that first frame. Try this again. Go. Oh. Something in there. It must be one of the other things I'm doing with a layer. But if I just hit play, what we should be able to see, if I go into my camera, his arm is going to scale up. And I went way too subtle. That wasn't super helpful. Here, one more. I'll do the head. And I'll go really big on this one so we just don't have to worry about it. I'm going to hold down in here. I'm going to hit spacebar. And I'm just going to shake it. And as long as I had... where are you? Animation layers? Why is my animation layer not seem like it's there? That's interesting. Am I missing something? Am I filtering? No. Interesting. All right. Quick plan B. I'm like so over time. I'm so sorry. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to this animation layer 4. I'm going to unmute it. I'm going to get rid of whatever this is going on because I think I've done something weird to my file. I'll go to this one. I'll hit this. Click that. Add that curve. So now the head should be in that layer. I should be able to hit the button to key it. Additive key, maybe? Yes, no? Let's find out. Let's hope for the best and go. It's not doing it. Why is it not doing it? You should see keyframes popping up down here. I'm not sure why. What a bummer. Well, that normally works. Live demos. But it is that easy when I think something about Something about my laptop is having a hard time. So it's me. Anyway, that's mouse mocap when it works. You just do that, you hit the button, and then it captures it, and then you can adjust from there. It's very nice, it's very handy when it works. It almost never doesn't work. And so that's what allows you to just kind of jump in and do that. This is the end of my talk. Thank you to everybody. I have one more slide after this, but thank you to all these people for teaching me things, for helping me out with the presentation. I'll be at Puget for some demos, and if anyone wants to take some classes, I'm doing a Summer of Unreal, 2 weeks of Unreal class, or 2 different 2 weeks of Unreal classes in July. And so if you want discount for Unreal Fest, that'll lead you to a page. There's a form, you can fill it out, and I'll send everybody discounts. So if you're curious, if you want to know, there's that. But thank you so much for coming. I'll hang out for questions, and I'll see you at the Puget booth.